Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And Stephen Park. And how was your week, Jamae?
My week was pretty good. Like I mentioned in the last episode, and you'll hear me mentioning this a lot, referencing previous episodes, but last episode I mentioned that I am starting a career shift and it's starting to feel more real. The program I'm going through feels very similar to all the things that I've done in the past, so it feels good in that way, but a lot of time is still left in the program. So yes, it feels like school. I haven't been in school in a long time, so it's learning how to be a student again, and it's both a joy and a little bit of fear-inducing, but I'll get through it.
So what's the new thing that you're doing?
The new thing I'm doing, not a lot of people have heard about it before, and it is like this very, I guess you can say, not necessarily hidden, it's not a secret, but not many people hear about it. It's called instructional design. The way that I explain it to people, it's learning for adults.
I feel like that's one of those jobs that I've talked to my friends about that we don't grow up knowing. Like, as immigrant Asians coming into this country, I feel like all the talk is always like, be a doctor, lawyer. What's the other one?
Be a teacher.
I feel like there's one more in there. Anyway, something that makes money and is a consistent job.
Definitely.
But I feel like you found it on your own, but then once you found it, we kind of talked about how someone I knew had also done it at one point.
Right.
And she kind of helped guide some of the questions of just what this profession was, because honestly, it's not super reassuring with the route that it takes to get to this point.
Right, because with teachers, lawyers, doctors, nurses, those are front-facing service jobs. We see them all the time. These careers help people, and it helps immigrant families. As opposed to instructional designers, they usually help businesses. And so that's what probably makes it so elusive. Like, if you're not in the business world, if you're not in corporations, it's harder to find or even know about those positions.
But I also feel like being in Portland, I've met a lot of people that have jobs that I've never heard of before. And
absolutely.
They make way more money than any healthcare profession, which is wild. And they're able to do more work from home things, whereas, like, especially in healthcare, which is the thing that I know, it's just you have to go in. There's no other option, and especially like within the pandemic, it was a lot to handle. Whereas it'd be nice to it's nice that we're starting to explore these things of jobs and opportunities that weren't always something that were in the forefront of our existence.
Absolutely. And like, the unfortunate thing is that we live under capitalism, which makes jobs like teachers, nurses, doctors become round-the-clock jobs because there aren't a lot of support or resources for those particular jobs. But that's for a different podcast. That's not us. So, how are you doing this week, Stephen?
I'm good, but shaken, because we just watched the craziest drama. It was called
From
Scratch. And then who was the main actress?
The main actress is Zoe Saldana.
Yes, Zoe Saldana, who does an absolutely amazing job in this. Oh my
gosh, the emotions.
So it's based off of a book. Probably a book that we're never gonna do in this because it's by a black author.
Yes.
But there's a lot of culture in here, which I think is really fun. Trying not to spoil too much, it's about a black female who goes to Italy, Florence, I think, and then kind of is exploring that space because she wants to get into art. And then she ends up meeting someone there. But the things that I really liked about it is the person that she met was Sicilian and still like Italian, but apparently there's a big cultural divide between Sicily and the other parts of Italy where they're looked down upon. And it's just like, it goes into showing, it's not racism, but the discrimination is ever so present.
It's definitely classism in that Sicilians, so we're not talking from experience, we're just talking from what we noticed in the show itself, and
how
also
they portrayed it.
right, and also hearing from other folks. So this is not us knowing, this is us just reinterpreting and sharing what we've known. So seeing that with Italians, thinking that they're more
Northern Italians primarily.
Thinking that they have more status, more like power over Sicilians, and thinking that they are more Italian than Sicilians are.
I think this. So for people that don't know what the story's about, which is how I went into it, did you know anything?
I knew a little bit.
Okay.
So I'm again not spoiling. I knew that sickness was involved. I knew that there was going to be a lot of tragedy.
I had no idea where this thing was going to go. I think the first 2 episodes was a lot of character and background building,
Right.
which it almost sat me out of the rest of the show. But then, yeah, Zoe Saldana does a great job of, I think Saldana, I think I saw Enya over her name. But I don't know, I'll have to look again. Anyway, she does a great job of really exploring the emotions. Whoever directed this did like a great job of putting that into film.
Right.
And then the whole series just kind of felt like a giant timeline, and it had different chapters within that timeline.
Exactly.
Which will probably end up, like, I know I'm interested in kind of going into the book just on my own time, and I don't know if you are.
Oh, absolutely. I will definitely read this on my own time. Even though we're not going to discuss it on the podcast, I'm pretty sure we're going to discuss it among ourselves.
Yeah. And then you are going to still hear bells. Our cats are ever so present, which is what I found out when I was editing the first 2 episodes. But that's my recommendation. I think it's a great series to kind of look into. I think Jamae would also recommend it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a nice balance between highly emotional and sad, as well as being light and heartfelt.
The light was... it's very dark. It's not dark. It's very deep. It gets very, very deep.
It does have a lot of depth. So don't go into watching this thinking it's going to be lighthearted. It is not lighthearted. By light, I mean that there are moments where you can breathe. Like it's not all crying.
Grab a tissue, grab the tissues, grab...
like a whole tissue box.
Yeah, towels, whatever you may need to kind of deal with the stress and the sadness.
To soak up your tears.
Yes.
Maybe just to hold on to and hug towards yourself.
Yes. Which leads us into our recommendation.
What is our recommendation for the week?
So the recommendation for the week is a little bit more broad, but it's your local library. So being in the PNW, we tend to use our library system quite a bit. We use the Libby app, which is an app that helps you get into audiobooks from the library. But better for the actual libraries are going there physically, getting those books.
Absolutely. And more than checking out the resources, because your library has a lot of resources. There's internet, there's activities, there are events, of course there are books, but there's also magazines, newspapers. Besides those resources, the one thing that we want you to do is get a library card if you don't have one yet. And for your loved ones who don't have one, encourage them, or just bring them to the library. Be like, we're going to take a really quick trip. It's usually very quick. For us in Chinook territory, also commonly known as Portland, Oregon, all you have to do is fill out a form, give it to a librarian, and then they'll have your card ready. So it's very easy for the most part. Get your library card, get your library card, get your library card.
Yep, and that's our recommendation for the week. All right, and then we'll get into the book. So first part of the book, pretty much the first half. We kind of split it into 2 because it's a pretty quick read, to be honest.
Absolutely. But before we start talking about the book, let's backtrack a little bit. What book are we reading now?
So the book is called I Was Their American Dream by Malaka Gharib.
Malaka
Gharib. I think I forget where she said it.
I wanted to mention that I love books that the characters themselves share the pronunciation of names that we know might be difficult just by first look or might be difficult because of cultural divide. So yes, and this is not a spoiler, but if you were stuck on how to pronounce Malaka's name, she does say it in her book, saying that it's not difficult, it's Monica with an L, so Malaka.
What page was that on?
Oh, that page, for those of us who are following along, is on page 41.
Yeah, so she just straight up goes, it's Monica with an L. I was like, okay, that makes sense. And of course I still mess it up. But what did you think of the book so far?
What I think about the book is that, again, like I mentioned before, it is so similar to my particular experience as a child of immigrant parents and as a third culture kid. This graphic memoir, especially because Malaka identifies also as Filipino, a lot of it brought back memories of my own experience. So I thought that it was very relatable. Even though I don't identify as Egyptian, I definitely identify with her Filipinx side. What did you think of the book so far?
So if you haven't read it yet, you may run into spoilers for the first half. We won't go into the second half because we haven't read it yet. But if you haven't read it, I would say stop now so you could kind of get your own experience on things and then come back. Or
if you don't mind spoilers and want to hear portions so that it will encourage you to read it, you can definitely keep listening. But if you don't want spoilers, go back, read it yourself.
Yeah. So my thoughts on the book, if I were to be honest, is that it is very fast. It moves through a very quick pace. But I do think going into the actual details of the book, definitely more of her Filipino side shows, because that is where she lives. She lives with her mother. That's where she lived. Yeah. Yeah, that's where she lived. She grew up with her mom and dad, but then she talks about the separation in the book where she then went on to live with her mother. So I think her stories are much more shared. I actually think she does a great job of like splitting the details. Like every time in the story she goes, this is who I am. She doesn't mention one culture versus the other. And then when she does do that thing of saying hi, or was it how are you? She says like kumusta?
Or sayak.
And then so she kind of like does a really great job of like, this is who I am as both cultures. I'm not one
or the other.
Yes, exactly. But then what did you think of her voice and style throughout this whole thing?
I really appreciated that at the beginning she starts herself off as being young Malaka, like very elementary, I think. I'm not too sure the age range. And then transitions into high school. So I feel like her style focused on that age, but didn't make it sound too married to that age. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, so her voice was very personal. It was very much a vulnerability. Like there is a portion where Malaka shows or like photocopies a zine that she made based on her high school diary, which I feel was like very vulnerable. I get scared thinking of anybody reading my diary, and the fact that Malaka was so courageous enough to show that to all the readers who will ever pick up this book, I was like, wow. Yes.
Because she's definitely a 90s kid. Like, she must have been born around, like, 86. 80s, 90s,
yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So she's definitely a 90s kid. So, like, if you grew up with zines and all those, like, secondhand things that weren't technology.
Right.
Or I guess now secondhand things. I think you'll find a lot of the stories in here very relatable, and her, like, upbringing very much in line with that. And then, so, like, do you think this... Like, how do you think this compares to other memoirs you've read?
So I think that's very interesting how you mentioned how the story itself, like the first 4 chapters went by really quickly. I felt like I had a very different experience. At the beginning in the first chapter, I kind of felt like it was a little bit slower paced. It wasn't slow, but there was a lot of building of like talking about her family and talking about her mom's side, her mom's story of coming to the United States versus her dad's side coming to the United States. And that one, the pacing felt slower to me because there was so much focus on those stories that happened before her. But when it came to her story, then it picked up pace. And I felt like it picked up pace because there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of showing comparisons. And like, for example, when there's a table on page 39 showing the social customs between Filipino, Egyptian, and American, and how there are similarities and how there are differences. And the graphics, those tables, made it digestible. So because it was so digestible, I felt that's where the speed came in.
I definitely felt like she did a great job of diving into her life. Like I said, for me it started off a little bit more slowly, but I think it was all because she was trying to show who she was, and I think that part of it just really started shining when she put in tables and just like these are the customs that I follow, but you can see the variances and differences between like her Egyptian, her Filipino, and her American side kind of all coming together.
Definitely. What did you think? So there's a particular part in her story, particularly in high school with Cerritos, and how there's a map that she draws out regarding the social goings on in
Page
Cerritos High
81.
School.
So
Page 79.
79? Okay.
Yes.
I'm reading off a Kindle, so it makes it a little bit...
That's fair.
A little bit different, but so background is, I think I told you, or I think I said in the last episode that I lived in Cerritos, same city that she lived in, which is what she then talks about. The other thing is, she also went to Cerritos High School. I graduated in 06 from Cerritos High School. My brother graduated in 02 from Cerritos High School. I think she graduated in 04 from the information I kind of gathered, which is just nuts. So reading this actual book was a little crazy because it kind of like gave me these flashbacks of different time periods. So I do want to go into that one, the map that they had laid out.
Yeah.
But before that, for me it was page 37, but there's this image of her at a locker room, and she's kind of looking into the courtyard, and then people are sitting, they're chatting. You could see like this umbrella, which is a lunch table there, and then there's like a little brick, what is it called, like a planter, I guess, is where the lawn is. So I think I know exactly where that is, except for the lawn on the bottom right-hand corner. And I remember this so specifically one day. No, it is that lawn. That lawn's there. I remember this so specifically because it was like one of my most embarrassing moments in high school.
Oh, no.
It was a rainy day. It had just rained, which doesn't happen in California, so completely new territory. And I remember, I think I was trying to like look really cool or something, and I had to run from a class that was on this side where she's standing all the way across campus to I think get to like the weight training room or something. And so I had a backpack full of books because typical high school, typical middle school. They give you physics books, chem books, everything that could possibly weigh your backpack down. It's hanging low off my back. And so I thought I'd be really cool. And this planner doesn't do it justice, but think about that brick wall kind of extending out further without land on the other side. So it's just a divider. So I thought I'd be really cool and try to jump that wall. But the thing is, heavy-set kid, not moving extremely well. I play sports, but like the backpack threw me off a little bit. So I jump.
Extra weight.
Mid-air, I think, I'm not going to make this. I'm going to put my foot on the planter, or the little brick, so that I could then propel over. But the problem is, it had just rained, so everything was really slippery. So I put my foot down, it slips, I fall forward, zippers on backpack open.
Oh my god.
Books land on top of the head, and I remember like trying to shuffle because this was right in between breaks, so everybody's coming out of class together,
right?
And then everyone's compiling into that little area space, right where I just felt. I'm like, like dramatic, and I remember it so well. So that one image, I was like, I know exactly where that is. The lunch lines are right there on the other side, and it is devastating. Yeah. Did you find the page that it's on?
Yes, it's on page 69.
69? Okay. Traumatic story. But yeah, back to the map.
Yes.
So back to the map. So I thought she did a really good job of like actually drawing this space out. Like I said, thinking about stories, I think about Senior Hill, and that's definitely where all the jocks were. I wouldn't even say football players and cheerleaders, but just jocks in general. Korean people definitely sat on that bottom area where they were kind of like on those umbrellas are actually lunch tables. They're circular lunch tables. We had the stage there. We had the other lunch tables where we had some of the Filipino people. But the thing that she doesn't show out is she has the anime kids on the bottom left corner, but I don't know if you noticed there are no band kids there. So that I don't even know if this existed in her world, but if you go bottom left and you keep going left, like all the way to the end of the school, that's where the band kids were, because that's where the band room was, and that's where my prime spot was. That's where I shared a lot of my high school joys and
So, are there any areas that you wish the author had elaborated upon further? Maybe particularly about Cerritos? Do you think that she would mention it more later?
I think I'm waiting. I think this feels very much like that buildup of this is who I am, and I'm curious what comes out on the other side. Because she mentioned some stuff in the very beginning of you have to be better than us. And so I think this is all building up to okay, who is she going to grow up to be?
Right.
And I don't think we just have gotten to that point yet.
Totally. That's fair. I personally think that all that Malaka has elaborated on already has been more than enough. I don't think she needed to elaborate more. I think like I mentioned, a lot of her story was very similar to mine. For example, when she talks about wanting to live up to the virtues of being a perfect Filipino kid, again, I think this is like a foreshadowing of what her parents are going to ask of her later. But I saw some of the things that she said, for example, like plucking mom's white hair, about preparing her little sibling for school. I definitely did those things, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is my story. This is me too. I feel the same. Like, another thing that she mentions is how in her world, in the place that she lives in, a lot of people just really wanted to meet real life white people because my background, I was born and raised on Guam, which is the land of Chamorros, and a place where a lot of immigrants go through from Southeast Asia in order to get into the United States, whether as tourists or to later become citizens. And countries like the Philippines, Japan, Korea, China, a lot of immigrants, and even from Russia, come to Guam in order to, again, get that citizenship or to have a taste of America. But the thing is, on Guam, it's very island culture, and there aren't many white people. The only white people we see are from the military bases, and they come in and out. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they hang out with locals, sometimes they don't. So, to meet a real-life white person, you either have to live very close to the base or in Tumon, which is the area where tourists go to or where military people want to get crunk. So, as a child, I didn't see a lot of white people. Now that I'm in Chinook territory, also commonly known as Portland, Oregon, I'm boxed in by white people.
Well, I think that's the other thing is you may have white people around you, but they're usually adults. You don't grow up with them. I would say being from Cerritos, one of my close friends early on, he was white, but it didn't feel, I think because of the area, because of what she was saying of there's so many different diversities within Cerritos, there was never a point where I even kind of considered that racial impetus until I started growing up. And then I started noticing different things. So for me, I've now gone to several different states where I've lived in at times, and it definitely starts to show of okay, you can live in cultures and not ever notice that there are racial diversities within them, or you can kind of live in, for me, I went to school in Boston, and it's just any difference that you possibly have, whether you're Irish or if you're American white, that throws a huge wrench into it, and people start having arguments and conflict. So I thought that part was super interesting, that she also felt oh yeah, we don't see a lot of white people here. I think it's funny for me now because when people mention Bruce Springsteen or I don't know, I honestly don't know. The only white culture things I know are ABBA. I don't know, Full House. Full House, right? That one's the one? Because I've watched a lot of other shows. I think living in the area that I did, black culture actually stood out the most for me, which then kind of evolved what I was watching and what I was looking at. But yeah, things, I don't know. I don't know these songs that people sing in karaoke's,
Totally.
like people yelling things out. Like I don't think I get it quite as much.
That's fair, which I think is the opposite for me. Like, even though culturally a lot of the people that I hung out with were Filipinos, Chamorro, Japanese, Korean, I had a lot of friends who understood white references and who read, like, especially when I went to college, a lot of my cohort understood references with American literature, English literature, British literature, and I was like, how did you all have the time to read all of this? And then in the back of my mind, I was like, because I was submersing myself in Asian culture, specifically Japanese and Filipino culture. I was reading manga, watching anime, watching TFC, which no longer...
Filipino channel.
The Filipino channel, which unfortunately no longer exists. But yeah, I was taking in a lot of other literature, other media, while my colleagues were reading a lot of white literature.
Do you feel like you ever kind of fantasized about meeting white people the way that Malaka did? That she did?
Not particularly the same way, but because, this is very personal, because I only dated I dated mostly Filipino guys, and knowing that America or the United States was the big place where the American dream is fulfilled, in my mind, I wanted to date a white person because to me would be a fulfillment of my parents' American dream.
I was thinking more of like a Little Mermaid experience. Like, I want to be part of this world. I want to try hot dogs and American pie.
No, I didn't want... For me, it wasn't about experiencing whiteness. It was more about being closer to whiteness. Like,
Okay.
I wanted to benefit from it without having to subscribe to it, if that makes sense.
It's interesting because I feel like growing up, I don't think I connected the same way that Malaka did with her culture. I grew up being kind of ambiguous about who I was. And my background is Korean, but I was the only person in my family born in America, so I firmly attached to that American landscape of growing.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I kind of ingested a lot more of Black culture. Like, this is not great now, but the Cosby Show was one of the shows I watched. But other shows like Family Matters, then watching Fresh Prince, like things like that. And I think because like a typical immigrant family coming here, not having a lot of money, having to work, my parents weren't the ones that were able to show me a lot of the cultural aspects of America. And I got that a lot from TV shows. So, you ingest what you watch, you ingest the things that are available to you.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I grew up knowing. And yeah, like white culture for me wasn't something that I really sought after. It was just there. But then on the second hand of that, Korean culture was something that I think I've now grown into, and I mean, I think it's something that now I strive to catch up and be like, I understand this part of me really well. Which I'm kind of jealous that she was so ingrained in who she was. Like, I think she even talks about at one point about her being Filipino and then talking to a bunch of people who were like, oh, I'm something Armenian, like people that really knew their identities at that time.
Right.
I was like, that's so amazing, because I think for a long time I even fought to say I'm American and not even the Korean part. And I think that was for a lot of us like we saw Hassan Minaj's stand up.
Right.
And there was that whole part of, yeah, Dad, I'm American. Like, this is who I am.
Right.
And I think for me, that was a big part of, this is who I am, being someone that was born in America. And now I always make sure to put Korean American in my of who I am, and not just because that's the flow of it, but because I am Korean first, and that is my background, and then I am American second, because this is where I was born and this is where I was raised.
Totally. I think there's something to say about being able to travel to a different place outside of the United States. Like Malaka talks about going to her dad's place in Egypt and then her mom taking them to many trips. I noticed, and this is just my observation, I noticed that a lot of Filipinos who are born and raised in the United States proper, like the continental United States, totally drop Filipino. They don't identify as that, and they only identify as American. I feel like I'm very much similar to Malaka in that American was last, and even now I kind of just drop American because I feel like I will never ever be quote unquote American, but I can definitely be Filipino because that's what I was born and raised in. And I also very much identify as Guamanian. I will never fully understand the plight of the Chamorro people, but I do understand like the culture I was brought into.
Because you grew up there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, like I think from what I've understood from the friends that are Filipino, because Cerritos also has a giant Filipino culture around it, and a lot of people that live there. Sometimes it's not even on them, but it's their parents that impress upon them to say, we don't want you speaking like us. We don't want you to be like us. And it was because of the whole idea of success, which is really something I'm hoping that Malaka goes into in the following chapters, of that really hard dissonance of being who you are culturally, but at the same time having your not only your parents but having society and everyone tell you you need to fit in this way. So I don't know, I'm excited. I feel like there's a lot more story to tell. I think the only thing that made me a little bit kind of down about this book, which is kind of what I was mentioning in the beginning, is like I just felt like there's so much more, and it just moved. And I guess that's what I mean by it moved so quickly, is every time she went to a different scene, I kind of wanted to just be like, hold on, like what's going on? Because like this relationship with your mom, like this relationship with your dad, like I see where you're coming from, but how is like where is this bonding happening?
Totally. And I think because it's a graphic memoir, that's where we're not able to get too much depth, because there is not necessarily the focus, but the medium of images versus wording. There's only so much words that Malaka can include or infuse into the graphic before it becomes all text. Right?
I can say her images, like you said, the tables and the little things that she puts in, and some almost are like real photos of experiences that she's had. And I think those are an amazing way to open up that space without using words. So I do really appreciate that she did that aspect.
Definitely.
Is there a certain part that you feel like stuck out the most for you?
For me, the part that stuck out the most, I believe, is I mentioned it already, like the parts where wanting to be the perfect Filipino kid, because I related so much to it. It definitely resonated, and it brought up vivid memories and vivid images of when I also wanted to be the perfect Filipino kid. Spoiler alert, I am not the perfect Filipino kid, and I don't ever plan to be.
Well, that one also had a graphic, right? There were like 7 or 8 images.
Yes, there were.
Was there one on making rice?
Yes, cooking the perfect rice. Yes.
Cooking the perfect rice, which is hilarious because when we first started going out, do you remember like our different techniques?
Yes.
So you would wash the rice how many times?
Until the water became clear.
Which was like usually...
Which was more than 4 times.
Yes. And for me, I think, I don't know why, but 3 times was kind of just a number I stuck with. And then the big difference was our technique on how to measure the water.
Right.
So what's your technique?
My technique is to stick my middle finger in, and the first knuckle is where the water from the rice to the surface of the water should be.
Which is standard
for Filipinos,
right?
Yes,
okay.
Filipino culture.
I don't know if this is like just a Korean thing or if it's my family thing, but our thing was you put your whole hand into the water and then you go palm down, and it should come up right below where your wrist bends. For me, I always had bigger hands, so I kind of had to remeasure where my mom showed me. But for her, because she had the smaller hands, it would go right to that wrist bending area. I have now checked and changed my techniques to be more of the Filipino middle finger down. I still preference a little bit more water, which makes the rice a little bit gooey. I think I make the perfect rice.
It's definitely gooey.
Yes. And then we have, if you don't have, this is a second recommendation for the episode. If you don't have a good rice cooker, go buy a good rice cooker. It's so worth it. Okay. So, I mean, I'm excited. We have the second half of the book, and if you haven't read this yet, or if you have, I think you'll notice how quickly this book actually goes by. I don't think you have to sit out an entire day to read these chapters. I think it's such a quick and easy embodiment of all of the words and the pictures that she does have present for us.
And even if you do take the time to look at the pictures and to like interpret them for yourself, it does still, it's a really quick read still.
Yeah. Do you have any predictions of what your expectations are of where this book goes, how you're expecting this to feel, things like that? I
predict that there's going to be a lot more tension in the second half because there has been, like we mentioned, a lot of setup of who she is, a lot of setup of where her parents were, where there are at this point in her life in high school. So I think that we're now going to see what the parents' perspective and her parents' expectations of Malaka herself is going to be in the second half.
I mean, now we're at the stage where we just got through her high school bit. So we're not even like, she's not even graduated yet, right?
No.
So, you know, like life after high school gets a lot harder and it starts kind of developing and finding your own identity. I think that part is probably going to be a big part of that second half is maintaining that identity of being Egyptian and Filipino. And I hope that I don't know. I think it's hard because it's a memoir, so it's happened. It's a real life story.
Right.
It's not like we're gonna necessarily go to climax and have it resolved.
True.
It's just this is who she is. It seems like a lot of this book is representing who she's grown up to be. So I think for me, it's hard to actually come up with a prediction without knowing her. But I'm kind of excited to see where it goes and see where she kind of continues to develop into the person that she is today. Yeah.
So if you're following along, that means that we're starting on chapter 5 and reading till the end. We're in chapter 8.
And then next week on our episode, we're going to go over the rest of the book. So we'll catch you next time. If anyone wants to reach out to us, want to share any kind of comments on what you thought of the book so far, or how you kind of felt with all this, or if you have a recommendation on what we should read next, how can they reach us?
You can reach us at AsianBookClubPod, P-O-D, @gmail.com.
And in social media?
Social media, Asian Book Club Pod, P-O-D, at Instagram. And if you want to see our personal book recommendations and look at our website, you can find us at bookshop.org/shop, SHOP/Asian Book Club Pod, P-O-D, at Bookshop.
Perfect. Twitter?
No Twitter. We don't do Twitter.
Yep. All right. Have a great day. Nope. All right.
Bye.
Bye.